Check one, check two, and we are rolling with another episode of Industry Interviews. I am your host and good buddy, Dan Brown Jr., creative director and composer of CrimeSonics. And today I am joined by four-time Grammy Award-winning mix engineer, Supa Jeff, Villanueva. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me here on CrimeSonics, Dan. Pleasure talking with you.
Come on, man. It's been a while since we chatted, yeah?
Yeah. How are you doing during this whole thing? You staying busy?
Yeah, staying busy. It's been really hot. And actually, where are you living now, dude? Are you in LA? Are you in Florida? Where are you?
I'm in Florida, specifically Orlando, Florida.
Yeah, and how's the weather where you are? It's been crazy hot out here.
We had a couple days where it got a little bit hot, but we've been actually very fortunate. Usually it is hot and humidity around this time of the year already for us. It's kind of the beginning of our summer, but it's been nice. Today was pleasant, 82, low humidity. So it's been nice.
Yeah, I think maybe even since the last time we chatted, we moved a little further out from LA, got a different rental house, and we chose this house because behind the house on the property is a separate building. And I think the guy who owns the house, I think he was an attorney, and he used to work out of this two big room building in the back of the house. So, we move in, we rent it, converted it to, CrimeSonics Central, the studio back here. Long story short, we've had some 90, 95, 96 degree days lately. And the air conditioner in this room is kind of on the fritz, dude. So I've had some pretty warm days in here. Let me tell you.
I can imagine with all the studio equipment you have going on there and all the hits, just every time you hit the keys and play your guitar, you just straight fire every time.
Oh, dude, the monitors are hot. The tube amps are hot. I mean, preamps are hot. Computers hot. Screens are hot. I mean, everything.
Yeah.
You walk in here, it's pretty gross. But so, dude, look. I am super excited to talk to you about some stuff actually that I've never even asked you about.
Okay.
And so today I'm going to jump I don't want to say all over the map, but I want to learn a little bit more about you as a person, as a brother, as a dude.
Sure.
And then for our listeners, if you and I can both assume the role of like instructor, like in teacher, and you know what, you assume that role. I'm the student, and I'm gonna just ask questions about your process, maybe some plugins, some hardware. I'm just curious, man.
Sure.
Okay. So one thing I did not realize, and I don't know how I did not connect this, but you are also a graduate of Full Sail University.
That is correct. I went to, actually, I grew up in Central Florida area, right outside of Orlando in Kissimmee. And so I had found out about Full Sail at an early age. I want to say like around middle school. At the time, I was kind of experimenting with audio on a really minor scale. More, watching people in church do, live sound mixing. I helped out a little bit at youth group, but then around high school, and through this time, I've been playing trumpet for about 10 years between middle school and high school and elementary school. So I was always involved with music, and somebody had told me about Full Sail, and I kind of discovered it in high school through a program that my band teacher put me in called Keeping Grammys in the School. It was put on by VH1 and the Grammy Foundation. And at that seminar that I got a chance to go to, they had different industry experts, people that were on the management side, the entertainment business side of things, and also, the music production end. And I always felt like I had a sense of hearing. I was very fascinated in high school, not only with, orchestrals and jazz bands and marching bands, but also just fascinated with DJing and how DJs would take two, different styles of music and mesh them together. And when I went to this conference, I actually met a recording engineer and told me a little bit about his career and what he does. And I'm like, man, I always felt like I had this sense of hearing where even when I was in orchestras, you're trained to listen to your section and blend in, with the orchestra as a whole. But I could, hear things amongst the orchestra. I could, little things like waking up to an alarm clock on your wristwatch, the little soft, tone and everything. And I was like, man, this is me. Everything that you're saying describes who I am as a person. Um, Funny thing, at the time, I was kind of destined to go into, if you asked me what I was going to do in college, I wanted to study criminal law. Um,
That's
but
interesting.
yeah, so, but, he told me about Full Sail, and I happened to, walking by a booth there at a college career fair that my high school had put on, and, got to meet the representatives. And I'm not sure if we had the same admission rep, but mine was, she was by the name of Sharon Rosen. And I went for a tour, um, and quickly signed up. I was like, this is it. This is where I want to be at. Prior to going to Full Sail, once I learned about engineering as a career, I started to say, okay, even though Full Sail's here in my backyard, what else options do I have as far as education? I looked at a 4-year university, being Miami, University of Miami. They had an excellent engineering program as well, and worked with quite a few of their grads. But what really drawn to me to Full Sail was the fact that it was very hands-on. Um, when I toured University of Miami, they basically said, I wouldn't step foot into a studio until about my 3rd or 4th year, versus Full Sail gave me the opportunity to be, almost from day one inside of a real studio environment. And it was very good for me because it's hands-on, practical experience. The class size was small, so I shortly enrolled right after high school. I graduated in '97 and enrolled that summer of August. I started and graduated with at the time, a 2-year degree, a specialized associate's degree at Full Sail University in October of '98.
It's interesting how you found out about Full Sail. I found out about the school. I was living in St. Louis at the time, and I was actually at a guitar center, and I picked up some mix magazine or some sort of magazine on mixing and mastering. I'm just flipping through the ads, and there was this small, like, quarter panel ad for the
Yep.
school, and I'm reading it, and I couldn't even tell you what year this was. This probably would have been 2003 or four.
Hmm.
And I just remember seeing that ad and thinking, yeah, that seems like a pretty cool school, and just pocketed it away. And it was one of those things that popped into my head, maybe a couple times a year. I would just, some reason, I would remember that school. And I
Hmm.
didn't go back for several years and actually start my education there. But, it's funny that we're on this topic for a second, because I found that my experience for my bachelor's degree and my master's degree, which I did online,
Uh-huh.
felt incredibly hands-on, even though it was, hands on a laptop. But
Wow, that's really good to hear because, for me, I try to picture myself in that situation now. Could I take a degree program like this online, especially being for what I do from the engineering aspect? Um, Not saying that I'm old school, but I treat it very hands-on. So I think I would have a difficult time learning, but it's refreshing to hear that you had a great experience online and it's benefiting you today.
well,
Personally,
no, no, keep going, please. Sorry.
yeah, no, just personally for me, I think it would have been a little bit not hard to stay motivated, but to what really helped me out was the hands-on instruction, being able to talk to the instructors after the class and kind of pick their brain, and then, oh wow, you worked on this record, and just have like a little small chit chat versus, the online experience.
Yeah, and maybe that also has to do with the focus of our degrees, because you were doing the audio engineering mixing degree, and I did, it was music, like technology and composition and theory. And then my master's has nothing to do with music. I went back and got one in instructional design. And so I
Yeah.
think I can see from your perspective as well, needing to be in the room. I mean, nothing's going to replace the tactile experience of twisting and turning these knobs and pushing these faders.
Yeah.
Okay, one more question about Full Sail.
Sure.
Sometimes when I bring up Full Sail University, which I very much enjoyed my time there, it seems that sometimes the school gets a bad rep or something. Have you experienced this? What's going on?
Very much so. I've experienced it both from graduates themselves and also industry professionals, hiring managers, studio managers, etc. Um, it seems to be kind of like the one apple spoils the rest of the bunch type of quote,
Yeah,
um, a lot of times, and I think where you know I highly recommend the school to people.
absolutely.
A lot of my teachers that I graduated back in '98 are still teaching there and still very much active in the industry. And I think that's what keeps the school great. Not only the alumni, but where I do think it has its faults is that you know it is a competitive field. There's not that many opportunities out there at a A-list type of level. Now you can make money, but if your goal is to work on the biggest movie soundtracks, the biggest hit records, the air is very thin, and it's there's not you can't go online and find jobs a lot of times for these opportunities. So I think that's where kids can kind of feel like a little bit of discouragement where they were thinking they were going to be able to jump right into a career like that, and it doesn't really take off. And I also have experience personally from grads, that um, they're financially in a rut because of it.
Yeah, yeah.
When you first graduate, you're smacked along the head with student loans, and even though you kind of know this going into it, you're still kind of expecting that little bit of a grace period where, hey, I'm interning, I'm not making much money right now, but you know it's a music business.
Right.
uh,
Right.
so I think that's the real unfortunate thing, that it's hard for people to learn, and we get into certain situations maybe a lot of times, and this is not to take offense to anybody. If anything, I'm hoping I'm opening up the eyes to, if you are inquiring about Full Sail, to look at personally what you have going on. I've noticed recently in the last decade, people are going through a kind of a midlife crisis. You've had a career in another job, and now you're switching gears and you have a family. If the entertainment industry as a whole, I personally feel like, and this is not factual, but um, you have to be able to go where the work is at. So, um, if you have a current family and you're, all of a sudden from two streams of income, you're narrowed down to one because you're taking online classes or attending campus, and your wife's taking care of the household means, and then you want to pick up and move to LA. I mean, you live in LA. I mean, it's not a cheap place to live at,
Not at
especially when
all.
you're first starting out. So there are some things that I always encourage people to not only look at the cost of tuition, but also look at the cost of what it's going to be like to support yourself for 1 to 2 years after graduation.
Yeah, it's interesting. And, I can piggyback on what you're saying just for anyone who's listening who might be completely new to the industry or thinking about higher education. Like I am a big fan of formal education. I think, not to rabbit trail or go down, a path too long, but I think it's very easy to just throw your hands up, and say, oh, I don't need this kind of stuff. And maybe some people don't. I mean, you might not. But there are some holes here and there. There might be little things that you find out here and there. One thing I'll inject here is I actually found out about the production music industry, which now I thrive in, and that's my entire career. I found out about this industry while attending Full Sail University. So I maybe would not have ever even found what it is that I do now if it was not for going to Full Sail. So I,
I,
I'm an
I,
I'm an
I
advocate.
have to, I definitely have to agree with you for me starting out coming out of Full Sail, not having any connections to the industry, not only to be able to talk to professionals that were instructing me that had been in the industry and worked various different types of jobs to see, you know, to educate me more outside, like what is it like to be an audio post engineer versus a music engineer, those type of differences, and then to have that support of people saying, hey, well, if you like this, you should go into this avenue, like music production tracks, or you know, for me, I wanted to work in pop and R&B music, so it was kind of like, all right, well, these are the hot spots where you need to be at, and that type of stuff. So the connections, a lot of times, I always feel like it's not, because I do feel like now that everything's gone so mobile and mainstream and online, you can learn a lot of this stuff online on your own if you have the right determination. I think where Full Sail still always holds its value is the connections that it has to the industry and the networking opportunities.
Yeah, I totally agree. Now, you had touched on something a moment ago when you said after you graduated, you talked about interns and internships. Before I ask you this question, I am going to look at some of these credits. I see Rihanna, Usher, TLC, Timberlake, Celine Dion, Lauryn Hill, and I'm jumping around your credits list. Beyonce, Carlos Santana, Mariah Carey, and it goes on and on and on. You have truly worked with some of the biggest names and the who's who in music in the world. And I mean, you don't get there by not knowing what you're doing, but at some point in time, you were just a new grad. So tell me
Yes.
about, well, how do you, what's that, how do you fill in that gap for us?
For me, that gap was about a 3.5 year period after I
That's not very
graduated.
long, dude.
uh, it is when you're, 18, 19, or and you've got the school loans, chasing you down, and mom and dad saying get a real job, and that type of stuff. But it's funny that you said that. I've never had anybody tell me that before, and now that I'm kind of thinking back out of it, you know, um, being thrust into my first big like session like that, where I was known as the main engineer, like I was still, faking it as I went, and relying a lot on the assistants in the studio to help me out with basic patching and everything.
Yeah,
um, what I quickly learned was, when I finally got to that position, is that when you're introduced as the engineer to a client as an artist, no one is, second guessing you or asking you for a degree. Oh, okay, cool, that's Jeff, he's our engineer, all right, cool, he must know what he's doing.
right.
So you have to kind of, if you don't know what you're doing, you got to really know how to act like you know what you're doing, and being able to control situations as they come. I think that was part of my first success, as a new professional. My second, success, I would say, would be, always learning from others around me. Within those 3.5 years, I didn't really necessarily jump into music right away, even though I went to school because I played in music. Music was my thing. I wanted to make money right away, so I actually pursued a career in audio post industry before that. And sometimes, looking back at early on, I didn't know I was doing this, but I was just kind of felt like I was, you know, a buoy out in the ocean, just kind of floating along. And, if a wave hit me on the left side, I go to the left. If a wave hit me to the right, I would go, swing the other way. And what I noticed is that as I was navigating through each experience, um, I would gain something from that personal experience. So my first year I spent in Atlanta outside of school pursuing an audio post internship. And after the first internship was over, after 6 months, they're like, hey, Jeff, you're great. If you'd like to stay on, you're more than welcome to, but we don't have an opportunity here. And I said, well, what's the problem if everybody likes me?
Yeah.
I just assumed that, hey, if, you're a likable guy, you work good in the system, you get a job. And they basically said I didn't have enough experience. And so I think the first year, navigating through those waters was like, how do I get experience without people allowing me to get experience, like being, positioned into an engineer position. And so I started looking at it. Okay, well, cool. What can I take from this opportunity? Can I take a connection? Can I take a workflow that helps better me so I can get into another position somewhere else? And so, I left with the referral letter. They pointed me to somewhere else. And when I opened, up the next door, oh yeah, so and so, referred us. They said that, you worked well over there. And then that's how I was kind of introduced to the next situation for me, where I ended up in music after, trying to pursue audio post was just that trial and error. It got to the point where I ran out of finances and means and had to kind of come back home and kind of regroup. Home for me was Orlando, Florida. And if you're in the music industry, I usually tell people, you want to be in the music industry, you have to go where the music industries are, LA, New York, Miami, Nashville, places like that, Atlanta. So being in Orlando was like the biggest no I could do.
Yeah.
And I had no choice. So I started looking for, okay, I know this is the wrong place to be, but what opportunities are here for me? And just started digging. And that's when I kind of came across Transcontinental Studios. Not only was a recording studio, but a record company that was producing all the boy bands of Backstreet Boys and Sing, Britney Spears, 98 Degrees, that a lot of you guys, parents probably me,
Yeah.
went to those concerts. But and so, again, it was just trial and error. It took me about 7 or 8 times to get into that studio, even with recommendations. um, it got to the point to where, okay, if I can't get into this place, I mean, I would sit out in the parking lot and, you know, shake this studio manager's hand every day as they come in, hey, is there anything I can do? No, Jeff, I'm sorry. We're keep on applying. We'll get you in through the system, that type of deal. But it was that consistency. And then finally I was just like, F it. I'm going to save up enough money and buy a 12-hour block at this studio.
Hmm.
And so I did that. It was $1,200 to rent. It was $100 an hour. I booked the B room, and I went in there, and the studio manager comes in. She's like, Jeff, I see you're on the schedule today. Who's your client? And I'm like, I'm the client. And she's like, well, what do you mean? And I'm like, I'm the client. I pay for this room. And she's like, okay, so who are you working with? And I'm like, I'm working for myself. Okay, well, where's your equipment? Do you need somebody to get you set up and stuff like that? I said, no, I booked out this time so I could talk to you and talk to the other engineers here and better myself. And when I kind of approached it that way, she was like, I got a better thing for you. Why don't you follow me and just put me right into a session? And not that I was physically doing work, but like to where I could actually sit in on a real session, watch real producers. And she kind of took it notice to saying like, hey, not only he's investing his time, but he's also investing his money to better himself. And that's what kind of really gave myself a push. I don't ever think, and even still to this day, I don't think I'm the best engineer in the world. Where I think a lot of my successes were just believing in myself and never giving up. And then also being a good listener, watching other people work, because now I'm thrusted into a room of professionals where they've had that success. So like, I'm not second guessing why you're doing this or why you're using this compressor or this technique. I'm asking questions of, you know, what is compression? What is this? And so like when you show a sense of interest, people are willing to really show you anything and everything that they can to help you out.
Wow, that's a fascinating story. I did not know. Now, when did you start working with Rodney Jerkins?
I met Rodney through Transcontinental Studios. I'd been interning and assisting there for about 3 years. Um, and he was producing a song for Backstreet Boys at the time. And happened to, the typical, scenario where the engineer calls in sick, and who's up available. I was the first assistant on the session that day, and studio manager's like, hey, this is a big guy, he's coming in, can you do it? Yeah. And did the session, went well. Happened to be he had a vacation home in Orlando, and he visited Orlando frequently. So just based off of that first time experience, being able, we weren't like chatty the whole session. It was just like, hey, can you do this? All right, cool. There was no excuses. It was just get the job done. And if there was ever a problem, which there always was,
Right.
I just kept my cool about things, even though inside I just freaked out, like, what do I do? The tube just went out in the mic, I need another mic, but like,
Mm.
I don't have the same mic. How am I going to make it match, and all this type of stuff. Um, and I think we just kind of gravitated to that. It was for me. I don't like stress. I don't like conflict. So um, for me, it's about managing. Part of being an engineer is about managing the tempo of the room. You know, if something technical comes up to where it creates a break in the creativity, that you're there to quickly resolve it and keep on going. And that's how we clicked, and he expressed to me, it's like, hey, have this opportunity might be coming up, let's keep in touch. And we did, and um, got the call to, go work with them around, let's see, that was right after 9/11, early 2002, to start working with him. And I worked with him all the way up until the end of 2006.
Wow. And when did you make it out to LA?
As soon as he called me up, he was like, listen, I'm in LA, and want you to come out here and let's talk about an opportunity for you. And I had no money, I basically like put everything on a credit card. I got out there on a Friday, and I expected to talk to him over the weekend, kind of hang out in the studio a little bit, and then maybe I booked a round trip ticket. And I figured, well, shoot, if things go good, I'll fly back home, pack up my stuff, and move out.
Wow.
Um, and I got out there on a Friday and hit him as soon as I land. Hey, I'm in town. Let me know. I'm available. I'm on your schedule. And literally did not get a return call or text back until Sunday, maybe 2 to 3 hours before my flight going back home was
Oh,
supposed to happen. And I was freaking out, man. I was like, man, this sucks. I flew all the way out here. Why won't you answer? I felt like a stalker because, come Sunday, I was panic mode,
yeah.
calling the guy like every hour, like, dude, you told me to come out here. Like, I'm here. Like, why aren't you
Yeah.
picking up? And took the meeting, and he's like, well, when can you start? And I was like, right now. And I never went home. I just kept whatever I had there. I brought 2 suitcases worth of clothes. I was like,
Yeah.
well, let me bring a little bit extra. But yeah, I started the very next day. In fact, right after I left, he was like, I think I may know somebody that was looking for a roommate. And there was this kid that did graphic design for him. Sure enough, 5 minutes around um, the studio was in his house in Sherman Oaks. And he helped me get a place to stay, and I started the next day.
So what I'm hearing from Super Jeff is I will hang out in the parking lot. I will shake your hand. I will buy time in your studio. I will drop what I'm doing. I will fly across the country. I will wait. I will not hear from you. And then when I do, I will still take the gig. That right there, my man, is the traits of a winner.
Yeah, and at the time, there's no step A, B, C, D of how to do these things. I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew that I was so close that I could feel it, and I wasn't gonna let it go. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I just knew if you could get me in a room, I could seal the deal, and just believe. It's weird. You can't kind of teach these things sometimes. I feel like, even to whoever,
yeah,
you have to experience it for yourself. You have to be pushed into a corner to where you have to defend yourself, because my only other option was to go back home. And I, at the time, I was valet parking cars and interning. So I mean, what did I have to lose?
Yeah. Yeah. Just don't give up, right? Just keep going.
Yeah, yeah,
That, yeah. Okay. So look, 4 Grammys. How many nominations? 19, 20? How many?
yeah. 20.
Yeah. Something like that, right? Couple. Just a few. So, and the reason why I bring that up again is because, again, like you don't work with the type of names that you have worked with. You don't get the kind of accolades and awards that you have been awarded if you don't know what you are doing, if you're not able to do the magical mixer dust, right? And
Hmm.
so if we can switch gears, I want to geek out on the tech and the nerdy stuff and the process. And so let me ask you a little bit. Well, first, before I get into even that, how do you start the next project? Like, does someone just call you? Do they send you files? Like, what does it look like now?
Most of my career, I've always been known as a tracking engineer.
Okay.
So my next project, my whole career, I've always been associated uh, with the producer. Like I worked underneath Rodney Jerkins. Rodney paid me a salary. I was his guy. So funny thing about my whole career, not knowing it, is that really all the work went to the producer and I was a byproduct of it because I had a good working relationship with that particular producer or songwriter. So a lot of times when I'm talking to people about, getting in the industry, how do you get started? Because going through the traditional studio route, even though it's still a good viable way to get into the industry, is not as common as it is, you know, 15, 20 years ago when I started. So a lot of times I tell them to, meet other producers, co-writers and stuff like that and start collaborating, networking opportunities, joining organizations like BMI and ASCAP. I know you've done recently over the last couple of years, the big music production for film and so forth. You've gotten real heavy into those type of professional affiliations. And so me becoming a member of those organizations and being able to network with somebody and then maybe have the opportunity to collab with somebody. It may not be a Rodney Jerkins right off of the bat, but maybe someone that's had some experience, has had a couple placements in the industry. You're it's a lot easier to get work that way because now you have somebody that's vouching for you. Yeah, I worked with Jeff. He's great. We just did this project together. Check it out. You know, and they're exposing it to their contacts and so forth. So nowadays my workflow is still pretty much through um, I would say the underbelly of the industry, the producers, the A&Rs, the people that I've met over the years versus the artists. A lot of artists that I do meet, especially new artists these days, really don't know who I am or even know yet some of the groups that I've worked with. Even though when you mention Justin Timberlake, that's a big name. Everybody knows who he is. But if you mention In Sync, not a lot of people know that Justin Timberlake was a member in the group before he had a solo career. So, a lot of times the artists are just, all right, cool, you're the guy, let's go, that type of deal. So, um, that's where I'm getting a lot of my work. And then even fast forwarding to where I'm at now, I've even kind of shifted a little bit over the years. I still do a lot of music projects, but now it's more, orchestral, doing music for theme parks and bigger productions like that. So even though I'm still in music, it's my client base is kind of diverse just because I'm constantly pushing myself into, you know, I like to say 2.0 or maybe, getting a software upgrade for myself. Just, I not trying to limit myself, always having that diverse palette.
Well, I can speak from personal experience. I've had the opportunity to sit in the room right behind you, watch you do what you do. And, for everyone listening who does not and did not have that experience, let's talk a little bit about your process. Let's say we have a session in front of us, we're in the studio,
Okay.
and, you know, it's whatever kind of track. I don't even care, honestly. It can be a pop track, a big trailer track, but it's got a bunch of stuff going on, top to bottom, bottom to top. Where do you start in this mixing process?
First of all, I take a listen to the rough mix. If there's not one, I'll just kind of quickly, without thinking, just go. First 5 minutes, whatever I can dial in, and then just kind of take it in from that way. And then after I do,
Let me interrupt. Sorry, are you like all faders down and then just start bringing things in, or are you just all faders to zero? Let's see what's going on. Like, fill me in.
yeah, so a lot of times nowadays, because of technology, everybody has their own equipment. A lot of times producers are doing rough mixes already with their engineers. So I'll get a Pro Tools session, and it might, okay, this is where we left off. This is as best as we can get it, Jeff. Keep everything the same relatively as far as volume. We just want you to create that depth and that punch and that excitement to the record or to the performance. So I'll start exactly with their settings a lot of times, just listening to what they have, taking notes of things that I like. And within that, I'm also listening to what is the melody, because melody is king. You want to make sure that that melody sits on top of everything. Um, so that 2-year-old baby in the back seat, sitting in the baby chair is just, they may not know the words, but they're humming along to it. Um, and so that's where my approach is. Once I've taken a look at that session, or if I'm faders down, and I just kind of quickly put everything up just based off of instinct and what I'm hearing within the first 5 minutes. It's kind of like a multiple choice test, right? Like when you're in school, they say, you know, if you don't know the answer, go with your first answer versus like going back and changing your answer after fact. Um, that's how I'm approaching a mix. And then at that time, once I've established a melody or I've gotten okay, cool. Now that I have everything kind of in type of deal, then I'll start muting stuff except for the melody, and I'll build the drums around the melody. I'll look for another, like a counter melody, to kind of balance that. And for me, some people like to start with the drums and build the mix that way. Me, I like to bounce all around a lot. Like, all right, now that I've got this all in sync, let's add this instrument. Oh, I don't like that instrument. Mute it. Let me see what's next, and
Yeah.
and just go along. But keep in mind that once I've set levels, like let's say if I'm working a lot of times on a pop record, I'll have the lead vocal in right away with just my drums. And once I get the perfect settings and the drums are knocking and all that type of stuff, and I add the next instrument, once I add that next instrument to the element, I'm going back and even though I have the perfect EQ sound on my kick drum, now I'm having to analyze how that perfect EQ matches to the vocal, matches to the piano, matches to, the hi-hat. And a lot of times, like I'm changing my settings constantly all the way up until I hit print, because I'm constantly, it's almost like juggling back and forth. Like I don't just set one thing and keep it that way throughout the mix.
Give me an example of what and why you would change as you were going through the mix. Like, what are you hearing that makes you go, this isn't right now, I have to tweak it?
Because I'm adding more frequencies to the mix.
Yeah.
So, going back to where I just started, if I just have drums and vocal, yeah, I mean, I can make those drums hit the hardest, and make that vocal really sound like it's up in your face. But once I start adding, power guitar chords or, pianos or even 40 tracks of background vocals, singing counter harmonies and all that type of stuff. Now you have to treat, okay, how does that kick drum relate to that counter melody and the harmonies? Is it matching now? Is it overpowering it and that type of stuff? So I'm kind of always doing a balancing act. I don't know if it's exactly the right way, but that's the way that I interpret music and how I feel at the moment when I approach every mix. I feel like it's a constant work in progress. You can't just set it and go.
Do you set your, like, once you have a great sound on the lead vocal, do you treat all of the background vocals in a similar manner, or do you do anything different with the background vocals?
I do. I treat them very much similar like the lead vocal. The only difference really would be a lot of times I'll even take the same compressor settings, same EQ settings, and just drag them down um, to like I like for me, for example, my backgrounds, especially in pop music, you have a lot of harmonies. We stack the vocals 4 to 6 times for each type of harmony. So if it's a low note, I'll take all my low tracks. Let's say if I have 4 to 6 of those tracks, I'll create an aux for that group, and I'll just click and drag the lead vocal settings to that, because a lot of times in pop music too, especially with the solo artists, they're doing a lot of their own backgrounds. So with that being said, I've already kind of set the main sound of it. Now what I'm doing is I'm not just copying and dragging those settings and keeping it there. I'm I'm adding panning, I'm adding depth to it, and I'll do some more subtractive EQing, because if you just copy and paste the same settings, you're boosting the same frequency. So now certain things that you didn't hear in that lead vocal that are annoying are starting to come out, because now you have 6 other vocals that are the same doing that same part. So I'll go back in on the background tracks and start subtractive EQ and taking out things that I don't like, but starting with that ballpark of where I had the lead. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And how do you deal with, let's say, a kick drum, floor tom, a bass guitar, left hand of the piano, some sort of synth, all of this low mid, low end, unintelligible garble? Like, how do you address that mess?
It's hard, kick and bass, they have to match. I think I tend to look at things like a pyramid, right? If you look at the base of the pyramid, that's the widest part. Frequencies, the lower the frequency, the bigger the sound waves, right? So they're going to take up more headroom in your mix. So I make sure that those are blending well, and that they're not taking up too much of my mix. So as I add things to it, I still have room for dynamics to grow, not only in being able to add more low mid frequency type instruments, but to also, to build as far as volume goes. Um, so I'm very, careful of that. A lot of times, I'm peaking my stereo bus a lot of times, even in Pro Tools, if I'm in the box mixing, if I'm just focusing on my low end, because I'm trying to get the best sound, and it's a lot of trial and error. I feel like that's where I spend the majority of my mix. I would say on the average, depending on the record, it could take as little as 4 hours. It could take on the average anywhere between 6 to 10 hours to complete a full mix. So I'm spending a good 30, maybe even 40% of my time just on my low end of the mix.
Yeah, it's so great to hear you say that because I concur. That area down there, that tubby, flubby, oh my gosh, it's something in the human hearing. It just doesn't want to clean up at times.
Yeah.
Do you ever do any like sidechain, multi-band compression? Talk to me about that kind of stuff.
So sidechain, believe it or not, even though I find it very useful, I never got into it because I never understood it in the beginning at first.
Yeah.
I've seen many people have explained it to me. It's even still tricky for me to do side chaining, but I see where the benefit is. And it's like, I don't want to say you can't teach an old dog new tricks, but I've just kind of been able to work around it and to still be able to get my drums to really smacking. For multi-band compression, I love multi-band compression.
Yeah.
Um, I and again, this was something that I didn't understand. In general, I think over the years in engineering it's or even producing, it's similar to like going to the gym and working out. You're not going to walk in the first day, do a 30-minute workout, and come out with the six pack and looking like, Fabio. You have to, go every day. You have to put the right foods in your system, right? You have to eat
Yeah.
the right foods. and stick to a plan. And over time, you become, fit. Um, for me, early on, those first 3, 4 years of engineering, I was using compressors and I was, besides EQ and effects like delays and reverbs, I could definitely point out what that sounded like. But when I put compressor on a track, I couldn't really hear it. And I think one day, just, a lot of times for me, training my ears and how not only multi-band compressors work or EQ and in general, I just turn knobs and I hear what it's doing. I slowly sweep back and forth. And you have those things that they teach you in school, start with the 3-to-1 ratio and da da da. And I would start there. And then once okay, cool, I can hear it. I can hear how it's affecting the sound. Let's go a little bit higher. Well, they told me not to go 10-to-1 in school. Let's see what happens if I go 10-to-1.
Yeah.
And it's like, wow, that sounds really cool on this particular record, but it's not always going to work for every record. With multi-band, where I'm using it a lot, it's on vocals, because I'm noticing that, um, especially nowadays with so many people, majority of the mixes that I get where, even if it's a major artist, a lot of times they're recording in the back of tour buses, in hotel rooms, in their home studios. So the same record could have been recorded on the same mic chain, but it was recorded in 5 different places. So where are at halfway through the second verse, it's not the same place where they sung it, through the first half of the second verse. So I'm using multi-band a lot of times, just right as my last thing of defense, to kind of like, okay, cool, if there's any frequencies that pop up, this is going to kind of just quickly just tame it a little bit so it sounds consistent to the first half, even though it was recorded in 2 different places.
Yeah, absolutely. And for everyone listening, multi-band compression is definitely my secret weapon as well. It allows you to add compression to a specific or a range of frequencies. Unlike a normal compressor, it will just compress that entire track or whatever voiceover track you put it on. This allows you to zero in on where you want the compression. I find it incredibly useful on live cello, because sometimes those cellos, when they go really low down at low C, it just starts getting real chesty and woofy, and it's pretty nasty. And slap a little multi-band compression on there, and it starts to even out that sound. It keeps it so clear. It's just a wonderful tool. Question. Do you do any, what's the word I'm looking, mid-side EQ?
Yes, that's something that again, over the last couple of years, I would say I'm just now starting to get into.
Yeah,
Um, and I think it's happened. It's forced me to get into it because of the way that mixing has gone these days. Everything sounds so wide nowadays.
yeah.
Even 808 sound wide. So it's kind of like where I've always started to where like kick and snare and bass and vocal or just straight up the middle mono. I'm having to compete with the new school and the new production people, and it's like, why doesn't your mix sound like this in the club? Like it bangs, but it doesn't sound big. So I've been having to adapt to that, and to make my synths sound more spacey and stuff like that. I really love mid-side EQing.
There's a trick I picked up, and I felt like it was one of those, like it was like the last tool I needed in this sonic sculpting, was understanding that the human hearing really cannot differentiate stereo field and low frequencies. And so by using mid-side EQ to uh, force lower frequencies into the center, but allow and actually push higher frequencies wider in the stereo field, that has solidified the foundation and the thump of my tracks and opened up the breadth and the width of those tracks. It's mid-side EQ. I'm going to put links to other videos in this podcast so everyone can learn this trick. Okay, Super Jeff.
Yes.
I want to talk about so let's nerd out on plugins for a second. I mean, and you can say company names, the whole nine. I'm just curious, what is your go-to EQ plugin?
Vocals, I like I want to say it's made by, it's called the Mag EQ.
Yeah,
Plugin Dynamics, I want to say, or Plugin Alliance.
I'm looking it up while you're chatting with me. Maggie Q.
Yeah, MAAGEQ.
Got it.
It's blue with a whole bunch of blue
Yeah,
face.
I see it.
I love that EQ for vocals. That's my go-to for vocals. For me in general, like
Screen snapshot.
I'm sorry.
I said screen snapshot. I'm going to add links to all these.
Yes, for me in general, my whole career has been based off of vocals. A lot of my Grammy wins, productions I've been along are always been pop. So vocals is king for me. I treat vocals like an instrument, and for me, the Mag EQ gets the perfect EQ. It's just silky. It's smooth. It's got this really great low harmonic thing on it to where I can, for somebody that doesn't have like, good chain, I can get some bottom end and some depth out of. Um, I like, something simple. To be honest with you, I try to keep things as simple as possible in the mix. I still feel like less is better. I still very much believe on the way how things are recorded. Like if you record it properly, you shouldn't be adding a lot of things to the mix. Um, Compressors, I'm a big LA2A type fan.
Is
I
there any particular LA2A that you like, any particular emulation?
Um, I mean, I'm always tending to go more to the waves because that's where I kind of, got started. I have the UAD versions and stuff like that. At this point though, like I've spent so much money on software and equipment that
Yeah.
I don't, even though UA, if you're listening, I love you guys and please send me some stuff.
I'll
but
send
I,
one.
but I hate being tied down to, a specific device, like having an interface to use their plugins, um, even though their interfaces are awesome and I own one, I just having to hate to buy into that. I just want to be able to quickly, plug and play and go. Especially nowadays, you kind of have to.
Yeah. What about reverbs?
Reverbs. There is, um, man, my boy just put me on to this one. It's made by, I'm gonna have to look this up too. Isotope just bought out this company
Cool.
a while ago. Let me look it up real quick. I'm sorry that I don't
Hey,
have
we
the
have
name.
the ability to edit the podcast, but I may not.
Um,
Let's see here.
where is the plug?
So I love geeking, and if anyone's listening, geek with us. Start searching because you can lose a lot of money today.
Not today, please. Don't. Not Well, I'm not condoning any uh, reverbs. Hold on. I'm sorry.
Isotope.
It's made by Exponential Audio. So they bought this company called Exponential Audio.
Neutral audio reverb. Okay.
And the one Symphony Verb, by far the best. You heard it here first on Dan Brown Jr.'s podcast. It's the best reverb
It's the
ever.
best one. Symphony reverb.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
Exponential Symphony 3D reverb. $299.
Yes.
That guy.
Yeah. If you can buck up and spend the extra money and get my boy has it. I don't even have it. I'm constantly using his iLock or his rig sometimes because where I'm working at now, I work for Walt Disney World Music Department. So we have a studio on the back lot of Walt Disney Studios where we kind of jump from room to room. So a lot of times, anytime that I can, I'll jump on his rig because he has it authorized there. But I do need to.
So Jeff, sorry to interrupt. I'm on the site checking this out, and it looks like there are so many different. They have the Stratus reverb, the Phoenix verb, and Symphony verb. Are you saying that the one out of all these, the specific one is the Symphony?
The symphony, it sounds the most realistic reverb that I've ever heard to like any unit.
All right, I'm putting that in the description. And what about delays?
Delays, keep it simple, you know. I use a lot of the Avid delays. I like Sound Toys, of course. They
Right.
have some really cool delays. Um, I even a lot of times for me, because I got so tired of using the standard, you know, Avid delay it is. A lot of times I'm going to guitar pedals to create delays, and you know, Waves makes a really great guitar bundle, the GTR bundle.
Yeah.
Um, I'll go through delays on there, you know, and see what kind of things I can get out of that.
We talked about EQ, compression, reverb, delay. I'm not going to go down the whole list of every plugin in the world. Is there any like secret sauce? You know, some plugins just do things to the audio. You don't even have to turn a knob. Do you have any sonic sweeteners?
Hmm. Um, you know, it's so hard because like, you know, I'm fortunate enough to where I get to work with a lot of high-end professionals. So, you know, if I'm not there person recording it, they have people that, you know, have just as much of experience with recording as I do. So the stuff that I get, I'm not doing too much to it. Um, but there's a new plugin that I'm actually messing with, and it's funny that you say the sauce.
Yeah,
Um,
secret sauce.
this one is actually called the sauce. it's
What? I love it.
uh, it's actually made by a fellow Full Sail grad and Hall of Famer, Jordan Young, also AKA DJ Swivel.
I love it.
He developed it. It's been 2 years in the work, and what I like about this plugin, I've been experimenting with it a lot on um, vocals, but it seems to be, you know, you tend to go to like, okay, I need a compressor, so you go to your LA2A. I need this EQ, so you go to a Mag EQ. This plugin just seems to have everything all in one. You know what I mean? There's a built-in compressor on there. There's a built-in reverb. So if I need something very quick, something new sounding, you know, something I can tweak, that's kind of been a little bit of my go-to lately as for like experimenting. I'm still kind of learning the plugin myself, but it's pretty user-friendly.
Yeah, I'm on the site now. It looks like it's at djswivel.com.
Yep.
And I tell you what, man, that is one sexy looking interface too, right?
Yes, it is. It is.
Maybe I'll let you link me up with DJ Swivel and we'll get him on this podcast and
Yeah, yeah.
talk about this plugin.
Another one I think is really cool. Is made by Waves. I saw this at the NAMM show this year, and I purchased it. It's the Ovox.
Ovox.
Yeah, that is a really cool type of plugin, and something I haven't really, even during all this quarantine time, I haven't really gotten a chance to dive in it as much. But
Yeah.
the few times that I have, it's just really cool.
Well, I am taking notes of all of these. I will put links to every single one of these in the description below this podcast. I only have a couple more quick questions for you, brother. I again just want to thank you for, hopping on, shooting the breeze with me, talking just about you, your path, and then being able to geek out a little bit on the process and all the tech.
Hmm.
I have an interesting question about mastering. So when you're done with the track, okay, it's done, sign, seal, and deliver. Artists, producers, everyone has approved this work that you've done, and it goes off to the mastering engineers. Talk to me about that process. Do you feel like when it comes back, you love it, you don't love it, they change it too much? Just give me some real experiences you've had with listening to your mastered tracks.
I like it. You know, I think you know, there's no right or wrong way to do things, especially in our industry. I just think the way that we produce as collectively, most people don't have the budgets to go to, you know, mastering or send it out to a mixer. So they're doing their stuff on their own, and they're doing a hell of a job at it. They're doing a great job. A lot of times, you know, I'll get, you know, people, hey, should I have this? Who do you master? Should I send it off? And I'm like, it sounds great. And I think a lot of times when people are unhappy with the mastering, they've gotten used to the sound, you know, gotten demoitis. So, as I like to call it. So a lot of times it's mastering, even though it benefited their mix or their master in some cases, um, they're now hearing something that they've never heard before. And I think that's what's throwing them off, to where most people don't generally like having their stuff mastered by somebody else. For me, I've always sent out my stuff. It's pretty much, I've always thought about it like going to a dentist versus an orthodontist. You know, if you need braces, you have to go to an orthodontist. Your regular dentist cannot put braces on there for you. So they have special equipment that where they're able to, you know, to master and do things that I can't do at home in my box or in my studio at Disney. Um, so I respect them and what they do, and I think that's why I've always had good results out of it. I've always felt like my tracks come out bigger. Maybe not as, they don't always come out as louder, you know. Then a lot of times I think too, new people are always, oh, well, if I send it to mastering, it's going to be loud. It's not always the case, you know. You know, for me, I'm always looking more for in depth and being able to consistently, no matter where I play it back, whether it be laptop speakers or if it's being played in one of the biggest clubs in the world, that it plays the same and it sounds accurate across all forms of playback.
Yeah, that is pretty cool, brother. Well, I tell you what, man, I appreciate you again for hopping on here, being so transparent, humble. I mean, we've had, you know, quite a few interactions, and it's always a pleasure. I always leave our interactions thinking, man, that dude is one cool. That is one
uh,
cool dude.
well, I'm glad I had the opportunity to come along, and this is just a prime example of, you know, networking and everything, of how we've connected over the past years. And now I'm kind of seeing you, and you're you know, your career's taking off and everything. So it's almost like a circle of life, you know, type
Wow.
of deal. So
Well, I appreciate you, brother. And I tell you what, man, again, I will put all these links in the description. I will put jeffvillanueva.com. And hey, man, thanks again, brother.
no problem. You guys take care.
All right.